The galaxy had fallen silent under the shadow of the Dominion. They were not creatures of mercy or reason, only rulers who demanded obedience from every corner of the stars. World after world surrendered without firing a single shot, kneeling in fear before the colossal fleets that blotted out their skies. Ancient empires that had lasted for thousands of years lowered their banners. Proud civilizations that once boasted about their wisdom and technology accepted chains rather than face annihilation. The Dominion had not simply conquered planets. They had broken the spirit of entire species, teaching the galaxy that resistance was nothing but a slow form of suicide. And yet, there was one world that did not obey. A small blue planet, circling a yellow sun on the edge of the galaxy, refused to bend its knee. Humanity, a young species compared to the great empires, had no shining fleets or weapons of impossible power. Their ships were crude beside the elegant machines of the stars, their armies little more than flesh and steel when matched against Dominion war machines. But when the demand came to surrender, the people of Earth gave their answer. A single voice carried across the stars. "We will not kneel." The message was so simple, yet it shook the galaxy. Other races whispered in disbelief. How could this fragile species stand against the Overlords who had broken even the mightiest civilizations? The answer was unclear, even to the humans themselves, but their refusal came not from arrogance, nor from ignorance. It came from something far deeper, something that no invader could measure or weigh, a stubbornness born from countless struggles on their own soil. From the storms and wars and tragedies that had shaped their history, the Dominion laughed at this defiance, for in their eyes it was nothing more than a spark trying to defy a hurricane. But that spark had caught the attention of many. Some watched in secret, curious to see how long it would last. Some pitied them, already mourning the humans as doomed. And some, buried deep within their cages, dared to feel a forbidden thing that had long been crushed out of them: hope. The first fleet of the Dominion came like a storm rolling over the ocean. Their ships were vast and dark, shaped like blades cutting through the void, their weapons bright enough to blind whole cities from orbit. They expected no resistance because none had ever come before. When their armadas descended upon other worlds, rulers surrendered within moments, and armies dropped their weapons at the sight of such overwhelming strength. But when the fleet came over Earth, the humans did not surrender. Instead, every government that had once fought against one another now spoke as one, declaring that Earth would stand united against the invaders. For the first time in human history, the borders that had divided nations dissolved under a single choice. Soldiers who had worn different uniforms now fought side by side. Engineers worked without rest to turn their machines of industry into tools of war. Scientists shared secrets that had once been guarded behind locked doors. Farmers gave food for free, builders raised shelters for strangers, and children carried supplies to those who fought at the front. Humanity had never known such unity before, yet the shadow of the Dominion forced them into one body and one will. The Dominion, confident in their power, launched their first attack expecting to shatter resistance quickly. Their beams cut across the skies, tearing apart defenses and striking cities, but they did not find panic. They found defiance. Human pilots flew old machines that looked like fragile insects compared to the shining warcraft of the Dominion, yet they moved with a recklessness that confused the invaders. They attacked from strange angles, sacrificed themselves to protect others, and fought not with fear but with desperation. They used tricks and traps born from a history of wars where survival often depended on outsmarting stronger enemies. The Overlords thought they were fighting a primitive army, but they were really fighting the will of a species that had grown stronger through struggle. Every time a city burned, new fighters rose from the ashes. Every time a family was lost, the survivors hardened their resolve. The Dominion expected surrender after the first battles, but the humans gave them only more resistance. Across the galaxy, enslaved species watched in silence. Hidden networks whispered news of humans who refused to kneel. Some dismissed it as foolishness that would soon be crushed, but others felt something stirring deep inside them. They remembered what it meant to dream of freedom, and though they dared not speak it, they waited to see what this small, fragile world would do next. The Dominion, however, did not wait. If humanity would not surrender, they would be made into an example. And so the order was given to bring more fleets, to grind this stubborn planet into dust, and to teach the galaxy once again that resistance meant only destruction. The war was no longer just fire from the sky and ships burning in the darkness. It had become something heavier, something that pressed down on every soul on Earth. Cities that had once glowed with light and laughter were now reduced to rubble, their streets broken and filled with silence. Families that had lived in peace for generations were torn apart in a single instant, and the grief of losing loved ones spread like a shadow that touched everyone. Each day seemed to carry a new cost. Each sunrise brought news of another town lost, another fleet destroyed, another group of defenders who had given everything and would never return. Yet even as sorrow spread, something strange grew alongside it. Humanity did not surrender to despair. The pain became fuel. The grief became a weapon. Soldiers who had already lost their homes fought with a fury that no invader could understand. Engineers built weapons from scraps of destroyed machines, turning ruins into strongholds. Farmers who could no longer till their fields carried rifles instead. Even children who should have known only school and play found ways to carry supplies, to heal the wounded, to stand in the shadow of war without flinching. The Dominion noticed the change but could not comprehend it. They were masters of domination, accustomed to seeing broken spirits and bowed heads. They had expected Earth to fall apart after the first waves of destruction, yet the opposite was happening. With every loss, humanity only grew more unyielding. It was as if their weakness was turning into strength, as if their fragility was hiding something far more dangerous than any fleet or weapon. The Overlords could not see that behind every scar, behind every tear, there was a will that refused to die. Far beyond Earth, in the quiet corners of the galaxy, other species listened to whispers of this strange defiance. Secretly, they remembered the days when they too had resisted before being crushed into silence. Now they heard of humans who fought on even when their cities burned and their skies rained fire. Humans who did not surrender even when victory seemed impossible. For the first time in ages, they felt the faint stirrings of something long forgotten, something forbidden under the Dominion's rule. They felt hope. On Earth, battles grew bloodier. Fields turned to graveyards, oceans filled with wrecks, and the skies themselves were scarred with endless smoke. But still, the people stood. When one army fell, another rose in its place. When one leader was killed, another voice shouted louder. Humanity carried a spirit that no calculation of numbers or strength could measure, a spirit that the Dominion was beginning to realize might be more dangerous than any weapon in the galaxy. The Dominion had grown impatient. Their fleets had darkened the skies for months, and still the humans refused to bow. Their generals could not understand why the endless waves of fire and destruction had failed to break the will of this young species. To them it was a humiliation that a primitive world still breathed defiance when empires older and stronger had fallen without a whisper. In their pride and fury, they brought forth a weapon unlike any they had unleashed before, a creation built to erase planets from existence. A ship so vast it cast its shadow across the curve of Earth itself. This was the Planet Cracker, the final word in the language of conquest, a reminder to all who watched that the Dominion's power was absolute and eternal. When the people of Earth saw it rising above their skies, Their fear was like ice in there. Blood. They knew that no wall of steel or fire could withstand the wrath of that machine. Entire nations could vanish in a moment should its weapon fire. Yet the same fear that chilled their hearts also hardened them, for surrender was no longer even an option. If they yielded, the galaxy would remember them as weak, but if they fought, even if they perished, they would leave behind a mark that could never be erased. Humanity gathered its last strength, uniting every ship, every fighter, and every weapon. They had leapt into one desperate strike. It was not strength that guided them, but courage born from despair. Small ships patched together with pieces of broken fleets lifted off the ground. Crews climbed aboard with no illusions that they would return. Families said goodbye with tears and silence, knowing the sky might be the last place their loved ones would ever see. And still they went, because there was no other choice. They aimed not for survival, but for a chance to wound the monster that threatened them. For even one blow might show the galaxy that the Dominion was not untouchable. The planet Cracker moved with terrible majesty, its armor shining, its weapons glowing like suns caged within its heart. Against it, the human ships were nothing more than sparks in the dark, but sparks could set fire to forests if given the chance. The human fleet darted and swerved, striking not with power but with cunning. They hid within debris, they feigned retreat, they used every scrap of knowledge from centuries of war to confuse and divide their enemy. And slowly, impossibly, they drew closer. The Dominion commanders laughed as they watched the swarm of fragile vessels throwing themselves forward. But their laughter turned into silence when the first explosions rippled across the outer hull. Small charges, tiny by comparison to the massive warship, yet each one found its mark. One by one, weak points in the armor were exposed. Human ships rammed themselves into openings, tearing holes that widened with fire. Sacrifice after sacrifice carried the attack deeper, until the unthinkable happened. Flames erupted from the core of the planet Cracker, a wound so deep even its colossal body shuddered. The Dominion fleet reeled in shock as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. Their invincible weapon was burning. Humanity, with ships that were little more than scraps and crews who knew they would not return, had struck the heart of their greatest pride. It was no victory yet, for the machine still lived, but the galaxy had seen what could not be unseen. The Overlords were not beyond reach, and the humans were not prey to be crushed. They were hunters who had shown their teeth. The planet Cracker burned in the heavens, its vast body breaking apart in slow silence, as though the universe itself could not believe what it was witnessing. For the first time in memory, the Dominion had been wounded in full view of the galaxy. Their greatest weapon, the symbol of their eternal power, was dying above a world that had refused to kneel. The fire of its collapse spread across the void. Like a beacon, a signal carried to every corner where eyes still watched, both free and enslaved, both strong and broken. The message was clear. The Dominion was not invincible, and humanity had proved it. On Earth, the people stood together watching the sky as pieces of the machine fell through the atmosphere, breaking apart and burning as they descended into the oceans and deserts. The price had been unbearable, entire fleets lost, countless lives sacrificed, cities scarred beyond recognition, yet the spirit of humanity stood unbroken. They had not fought for conquest, nor for glory, but simply because they refused to surrender. Their resistance was not born from arrogance, but from something older, something that had carried them through storms, wars, and endless struggles since the dawn of their existence. The belief that no matter how strong the enemy might be, freedom was worth more than life itself. The Dominion's surviving fleets withdrew, not in defeat acknowledged, but in fear disguised as strategy. They had come to crush a primitive species, and instead they had found themselves facing an enemy unlike any other, one that measured victory not by survival, but by defiance. Across the galaxy, whispers became shouts. Slaves looked at their masters and saw chains that could be broken. Subjugated species who had hidden their rage for centuries felt the first breath of courage return to them. And they all looked toward Earth, a small blue planet that had stood alone and lit a fire brighter than the Dominion's darkest shadow. Humanity did not declare themselves rulers. They sent no message of conquest, only a voice that reached the stars and carried the truth of their survival. They said they would fight not only for their own freedom, but for the freedom of all who wished to stand beside them. They said the age of silence and submission was over, and though they were scarred and bleeding, they would carry the weight of defiance until the galaxy itself was free. The words were not spoken with arrogance, but with quiet strength, a promise that echoed far beyond the wreckage of war. And so the galaxy changed. For the first time in generations, the Dominion was forced to retreat, and their aura of eternal victory was broken. Hope spread like fire through dry fields, leaping from one world to another, carried by the memory of humans who had chosen to fight rather than kneel. Every species had surrendered. Every empire had lowered its flag. Every people had been broken under the Dominion's hand, but not humanity. They had stood, they had bled, they had endured, and in their defiance they had given the galaxy something more powerful than weapons or armies. They had given them a reason to rise again. The story of Earth would be told and retold across stars and generations. It would not be remembered only as the tale of a desperate war, but as the moment when one fragile world taught the galaxy the meaning of resistance. And as the fires of the planet cracker faded into the night sky, one truth remained, carried in every heart that dared to hope. Every species had surrendered, except humanity, and because of that choice, the galaxy would never be the same again.